Hello again. Now, the Finance Minister is set to explain to Parliament why Eskom has been granted an exemption from reporting irregular, wasteful and fruitless expenditure and losses from criminal conduct, especially over the next 3 financial years up to 2025. The outcry has been following this announcement. Let's unpack the details to get a better understanding now. I'm joined by the Treasury's Acting Director General, Ismail Momoniat. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time. There are a number of questions to try and unpack here. But the very first question I want to put to you is, I've seen the statement that you've issued explaining why, but for the benefit of our viewers, can you tell us exactly what is this exemption and why?
Good afternoon, Dan, and to your viewers. Dan, let me say, when I see the strong interest and the strong criticism of us in issuing this exemption, I take a positive point from it, that South Africans are concerned about fighting corruption, and they want us to do more to fight corruption, and to fight corruption at Eskom, as we've seen, the impact on load shedding and so on. So I think that that's a positive, and I'm happy that South Africans want to be actively involved in that fight. And certainly as Treasury, we have been and continue to be totally committed to fight corruption at Eskom, any other SOE, any department in government. So that's the first point. I think the confusion is that when this exemption was published, and again, I also accept the criticism that we didn't have an explanatory note at the time. And so that led a lot of the speculation, and the speculation has sort of, in a manner of speaking, gone wild, okay? It's gone all around, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. The exemption, and perhaps we regarded it as a purely technical process to assist how Eskom reports in its financial statements and annual report. Remember that state-owned entities, like any other listed company, has to also follow the Companies Act and the International Accounting Standard, IFRS, and they also have to report to the JSE in terms of their bond requirements and so on. So they've got pretty onerous reporting, and nothing changes on that.
Are you saying, sorry, Mr. Momoniat, are you saying if nothing changes, are you saying that the exemption, which you'll clarify exactly why, will still require Eskom to disclose important material information?
Yes, I'm coming to that. So nothing changes in terms of the Companies Act and in terms of the JSE requirements, what they're required to do for their audit. And those are very onerous provisions. But unlike other companies, a state-owned entity, rightly, I think, also has to report in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. And that's where we get some technical issues that arise. And the technical issues that arise, and again, the exemption has been given is just for one provision of how they report certain types of irregular and fruitless expenditure. That is going to be, some of it is reported in their financial statements, some of it is reported in their annual report, which, as you know, contains the financial statements. So when it comes to anything related, material losses related to corruption, those will still be reported in a financial statement. However, there's many more administrative non-compliance, which does not involve any significant amount of money, and sometimes no money at all. And that is being reported in the annual report. And even that, the Treasury can make sure will still be audited, but it's audited separately from the financial statements. Why are we doing all of that? Because then an Eskom or Transnet don't get qualified beyond what any listing company would get qualified for. So certainly, if they mismanage, if there's corruption, they will get qualified, like in terms of the normal companies.
Is that only this technicality? Sorry, Mr. Momoniat, just to understand, this technicality, is it only pertaining to Eskom's reporting obligations under the PFMA?
And only one sub-clause, which is related to irregular and fruitless expenditure, and we're dealing with some of the historic expenditure and the current expenditure, and only in relation to what I would say are administrative non-material transactions. To the extent that they have to report on that, it doesn't clutter up their financial statements and doesn't make them more prone to being qualified than, say, other companies which are doing the same thing. So they will still be qualified if they do bad things like any other listed company would. But there are other things that also get them qualified. And why does that matter, Dan? And sorry, I'll stop there in a second. Why does that matter? Because that impacts on their cost of borrowing. It impacts on their credit rating if they get qualified. And it means that they then come to us in a fiscus and they either want more funds or guarantees. So it impacts on the taxpayer. And that's what we're trying to reduce the likelihood of that. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I thought Eskom, with you having taken over a bulk of the debt, as the minister announced during the budget speech in February, that Eskom should not be borrowing any more money.
No, they're going to be allowed to borrow, for example, for the transmission lines, or we said not for generation, but for the transmission lines and for distribution infrastructure. And those are very important objectives.
Yeah. So on this exemption, on this exemption, you say you understand the criticism, you welcome it. That shows South Africans are very concerned that we shouldn't have any corruption. This technical exemption, can you reassure us or assure South Africans that it will not undermine transparency and accountability? Because we know where Eskom has been. Mr. Under the Rate, the former CEO, told my colleague Annika Larsen just a few weeks ago that Eskom is losing about R1 billion a month due to corruption. Now, if technically they shouldn't be reporting on fruitless, wasteful and irregular expenditure, will that not undermine transparency and accountability?
So then, what Mr. De Ruyter said are serious allegations, and they must be investigated, and I hope they are being investigated, not just by the Eskom board, but by the police, the Hawks, and so on, and all the agencies that have those powers. So they must be investigated on that. Remember that when you're talking about corruption that's still going to happen, that you don't capture that in irregular expenditure now, because it's got to be spending that's already happened. So certainly, I don't believe these provisions, this exemption, will kind of undermine any investigation that must be taking place, and reporting and transparency on time. Okay, it doesn't do that. But let me say, we are listening, government. Certainly, Treasury is very concerned, even if it's a perception, even if we think the perception is not fully correct. We will not only go to Parliament, but I'm hoping that we can call up a meeting on Thursday of all the organizations to explain to them what we're trying to do. And we are not averse to listening and strengthening some of the provisions that they want. Because like them, we want to make sure that we don't even give an inch of space more to any corruption in that organization. You see, we don't want to be party to hiding any corruption. So that commitment certainly we could give to the people of South Africa.
One of the allies of the governing party, that's COSATU, I spoke to them earlier ago, Matthew Parks in Parliament. They've been scathing about this and they're expressing all sorts of worries. It's good to hear you saying that you're going to be consulting and talking to more people, and on Thursday you want to explain more, because there has been this confusion. Just your response to this question. We understand that the minister, Inokondongwana, should be the one who then disciplines those who are involved in irregular expenditure. You as National Treasury should be doing that. We have a long-standing history of irregular expenditure, wasteful expenditure and fruitless expenditure in state-owned enterprises. Why has this not been happening, the disciplining part of those who've been found wanting in this regard?
So, look, once you deal with discipline, you deal with labor legislation. And in our current system, look, I'm not a lawyer, so, but let me try and explain the way I think the system works. That when there is any transgression, it's up to the minister of that entity or the board to then sanction the accounting officer or the accounting authority. So if they, and even there may be limits. They got to do it in terms of labor legislation and due process and so on. So that's the way the system of discipline works. Treasury can't call up, and in fact, that's what we're frustrated. It can be in a municipality, it can be in an entity, it can be in another department. We can't call them up. We can only do so if it's an official that works at the National Treasury.
Okay, back to the technical difference now that you've explained earlier. You are separating what they can disclose in financial statements, which must stand alone, away from the annual report. It doesn't change the fact that there could be irregular expenditure and wasteful expenditure and fruitless expenditure. So basically, the part of that information will be in the background, and what will be upfront to facilitate all the other things you have said, including borrowing for transmission and stuff like that. It will set them apart. But it doesn't really change the true picture. I mean, was there no other way that you as Treasury could have assisted Eskom?
Look, for the moment, let me say, when we extended this for Eskom, this was done for Transnet last year. And there had been some engagement, for example, with the Auditor General last year on Transnet. There wasn't as much this year. So this year when it came, frankly, to my desk, and I saw it last week, it looked like to be more of the same, and we understood that problem. Having said that, as I said, we're a listening government, and we'll hear, I think, South Africans, many organizations feel strongly. We want to just explain to them the problem we're trying to deal with. And I'm not saying this may be the only way to solve the problem. There may be other ways. And we're open to hearing those suggestions.
Would you be prepared to reverse the decision? Would you be prepared as Treasury to reverse the decision after these consultations that you're going to be embarking on this week?
All options are open. And we've done that when we take tax policies, when people raise objections and they substantiate that. We're willing to look at all options on the table, but we do need to deal with the problems that Transnet and Eskom have, that they tend to become more prone to be qualified, just given that you've had state capture and the state that it's left.
But that's legitimate. Sorry, Mr. Momoniat, that's legitimate that they tend to be qualified because we know where they've been. I mean, the state capture exposed all of that. So the concerns would be there. You don't want to,
Dan, don't misunderstand me. For 6 years, Eskom and Transnet got no qualification when there was massive corruption. This system, unfortunately, doesn't identify corruption at the time. What they've been, and they should have been qualified then. I agree with you, okay? The issue now is that in trying to reverse that, because now you do have a new board, and the previous board came to try and reverse the impact of state capture. What they're finding is that some of these administrative processes are so overwhelming, and it's making them prone to getting qualified, even when they are trying to fix things up. Now, I know what Mr. Director has said, that to the extent that there's continuing corruption, and let me say, I think that corruption has become entrenched in South Africa, and that's one of the reasons, if you really dig deep, why we suffered the bad fate of being grey-listed by the FATA, that but we are in fixing up mode, and that's what we're trying to do.
But if you are in a fixing up mode, you should leave no room for anybody to try anything technically to hide the truth from you as Treasury and South Africans.
But there's no way that it's been hidden. That's what I'm saying. When you say hide, what do you mean? It's not hidden. It's either in the financial statements or in the annual report.
But to find it, you're going to have to go to page 400 and something. It won't be upfront.
No, we can make it prominent as well, and people sort of know. I think those who understand financial statements know what pages to go, and what you need is to explain to the public if things are hidden. Certainly in any financial statements or the annual report, I think that's not a good practice. You hope that Eskom and others will be transparent. Remember, the Treasury doesn't come in on their financial statements, but how they present, we can put provisions. And as I said, we hope to hear proposals of how we can strengthen the mechanisms, yet deal with the problem that these entities have, which ultimately are still a problem for the fiscus and for taxpayers. And that's the dilemma.
And taxpayers currently are concerned that you might be opening the door with these provisions that U.S. Treasury have enabled Eskom to undertake under the PFMA, technically, as you've explained, so that they are able to get unqualified audits. And in my books, it's like it's artificially so. And secondly, to be able to borrow money in order to get capital to finance other projects like transmission. Final question to you, Momoniat. Listening to everybody's voice currently, you're going to be consulting some more. Is there room that you might change your decision?
Yeah. Look, Dan, we're not committed to any particular measure, okay? The issue is how do we solve the problem? That if Eskom is fixing itself up, or Transnet, that they don't get they're more prone to qualification than a listed company that's in the same space as them, okay? That's what we're saying, because that impacts on their ability to borrow. And they do need to borrow both for capital and sometimes operational reasons. So, for example, if Eskom needs more diesel and it needs more money, it should be able to go and borrow. Otherwise, they have to come to the fiscus.
So you are open to exploring different ways of dealing with this problem other than this controversial exemption?
Absolutely. And given, I think, our own reputation, right, in fighting state capture and fighting corruption, that, we will continue on that path.
Okay.
But yes, we're open to criticism and we're open to suggestions.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
To be a public official.
Thank you very much for your time. Yes, and as a public official who's managing taxpayers' monies, it's very important to make sure there's integrity, accountability, and transparency all the time. We'll have to wait and see how this one will play itself out. Mr. Ismail Momoniat is the Acting Director General of the National Treasury, explaining their reasoning, their rationale for this exemption against Eskom, which has caused an uproar in different sectors of the country. And we'll continue to explore some more reaction here on eNCA about this matter. And we'll have to wait and see what kind of suggestions might come from various people in order to change this decision. As he said, the government is open to changing its mind. Well, time will tell.